Hello, welcome to today's In Conversation session about infertility awareness and support in the workplace. I'm Liz Mayers, co-founder of EDI Accreditation. We're a bit like an ISO certification for the workplace. We measure EDI performance, provide a kite mark of achievement, and encourage best practice in the long term. Because we're completely impartial, we don't sell consulting or training services, but we found that most organisations, once they've become accredited, just want to keep getting better and better. So we built a brilliant community and network of specialists to help them on the next steps of their journey. And I'm delighted today to be joined by a fantastic panel from our community and network to talk about the sensitive but really essential topic of infertility in the workplace. If I can introduce you to ask you to introduce yourselves. We'll go alphabetically, so we'll start with you, Afam.
Yes, hello everyone, good morning. Thanks for having me here today, Liz. So my name is Afam Onyenakala. I am the co-founder alongside with my wife with our company's called Adobe Fertility. We are a community interest company, and we're here to support the fertility journeys of couples diagnosed with infertility. So with us, we tackle three critical areas: the financial barriers to accessing fertility treatment, the scarcity of community support and education specifically for couples diagnosed with infertility, and finally, the persistent stigma surrounding infertility. And one of our goals for the end of 2025 is to fully fund the diagnostic investigations for 10 couples and fully fund the IVF treatment for 3 couples.
Amazing, that's great. Thank you so much for being here. That's great work. Emma.
Morning, thank you for having me as well. My name's Emma Menzies and I am a coach specialising in fertility at work matters. My background is as an employment lawyer, and I was working as an employment lawyer when I started my own lengthy fertility journey. And I really struggled to manage that alongside my corporate career, and ended up burning out and quite unwell. And that's when I was introduced to coaching, and it was a real gift to me, and it became one that I wanted to give back. So I trained as a coach myself. And it was interesting to me that as an employment lawyer, I wasn't at the time seeing or hearing anyone talking about fertility in the workplace. And the more I researched it, the more I looked into it, the more I realised it was because we weren't talking about it as opposed to it not happening, and that my experiences were far from, rare. I wasn't the only one, as it felt like at the time. And it wasn't really being talked about in fertility circles either. There was a lot of support out there, but not specifically for this intersection between two really important areas of life. So as I sort of progressed with my coaching, I became a lot more interested and a lot more specialist in actually helping people manage the impact of fertility challenges on their working life and managing these two areas of life together, and also helping line managers as well, who are tasked with managing people who are going through this in the workplace. And that's become a real passion of mine and a real focus in the last few years. And I can see things are changing and things are moving, which is great, but there's still a long way to go.
Amazing, thank you, Emma. And last but not least, Jo.
Hi everybody, thanks again for having me, Liz. So my name is Jo Theis and I am co-founder of a learning and development consultancy called Developing Growth. We essentially help organisations with everything people development. So that might be supporting managers and leaders with their development. That might be emotional intelligence. One of my biggest passions is ED&I, and we have an ED&I program that we deliver to businesses as well. People are an organisation's biggest asset, so it's all about nurturing those people and making them the best that they can possibly be. And we are really big on making learning and development accessible to everyone. There's organisations that are inaccessible for some smaller organisations, so we want to be able to be those people that can provide that support to small, medium and large businesses with everything people.
Amazing, thank you. So today, as I say, with National Infertility Awareness Week coming up, I think it's really important that we have this conversation. Many people take fertility for granted. I think lots of us spend our 20s trying not to get pregnant, focusing on our careers or getting to a place where we feel established enough to start a family. And it's only at that point that we realise that 1 in 7 couples conceiving isn't straightforward. For anyone who hasn't been through fertility challenges, we're often not aware of the full extent of the absolute nightmare roller coaster that people are on at this time. It's usually something that's not talked about very openly. So unless a family member has been through it, or you yourselves, I think many of us are quite clueless about the impact and the full challenge that it brings. And again, most of us don't have the luxury of being able to give up work to concentrate on starting a family. So there is always going to be that juggling the work life and the roller coaster going on outside work. So how do employers know what their people are going through and how to best support them? So this conversation is to help do that, to raise awareness and help workplaces sort of think about how they can better support people in this part of their lives. So our panel today are all speaking from first-hand experience. So again, thank you for sharing a very personal and private experience to help other people learn. I hope that people that haven't experienced fertility issues can imagine some of the most obvious difficulties and empathise with those. But I think it's something that's really complex, both physically and emotionally. So I'd love to start off just by asking the three of you, what were the most unexpected or difficult challenges that you faced that you didn't know about before your journey began? Who wants to start with that question? It's a big one.
I don't mind going first.
Thank you.
I think for me, I could so relate to what you just said there. You spend half of your life not wanting to be pregnant, and then suddenly it's there, and it's all you're thinking about. So for me, when I think about that journey and being in the workplace, it was my lack of understanding of actually the process itself and how intense that process is, and what I mean by that is how frequently you're having to go to the clinic, for scans, for blood tests, the ups, the downs of, your hormones, and are your eggs growing, and all the bits and pieces. And it was like a roller coaster. And I guess I was naive, and I just thought, oh, you go along, you do the injections, and that's it. I didn't realize the intensity of that every other day going to the clinic, and you can't decide when you go to the clinic tells you when you go to the clinic. So you're kind of, if you've got something scheduled in work, you've got to find a way to get out of that meeting or whatever that training session you're delivering, and you've got to, like for me, I had to mission it across London to get to the clinic, because of course it wasn't next door to my workplace. So for me, I think that whole process was completely overwhelming, and it wasn't, I just didn't realize it was that complex and intense. And yeah, you don't set the rules on it. You're kind of dictated, right? You need to be here then, and the ups and downs of the injections and the blood tests and all the things that come with it was just intense.
Yeah, I can imagine. And that's actually once you've started the journey. I know a good friend of mine. She had a number of miscarriages, and was at the GP saying, surely this could be investigated now. And the GP, I don't know how this was allowed to happen, how they haven't been struck off, but he laughingly said, no, the magic number's 10.
so insensitive.
And how is that magic? There is nothing magical about having to go through that degree of loss. But that was before even investigations would happen from the NHS perspective. So actually getting to the point where you're diagnosed with what the problem is and what the challenge is and how you're going to address it, that in itself can be huge before you get into the journey, I think. I was absolutely flabbergasted at the time. I would have had no idea that there were those kind of challenges. As I say, a lot of us take it for granted. So
you've just made me think about something actually, because it was 10 years ago for me now, about this time 10 years ago, but it's reminded me of just the invasive questions. So before you even go through the journey, the questions that you are asked and the tests that you have to do, which for somebody who can conceive naturally, they would never be asked those questions. So questions around like, are you going to, abuse your children, quite intense, sort of like, whoa, hold on a minute, we just want a family. And I imagine if you conceive naturally, you never ask those questions because you've conceived naturally. I understand why they do it from a safeguarding perspective, but in that moment when you're feeling pretty low as it is, to be then asked those questions before you can get started is pretty intense. Yeah, it's just a memory that's just come back.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. Emma, Afam, is there what for you was the most unexpected or hadn't even occurred to you would be something you'd face?
I think for me, it wasn't so much that there was one thing, it was the fact that it impacted absolutely every aspect of life. It just completely consumes you and pervades all relationships, all aspects of life. And for me, that was the biggest surprise. That was the biggest thing that you just can't prepare yourself for, that it's just so all encompassing, all consuming, and it just has impacts, as I say, all aspects of your well-being, physical, mental, emotional, social, financial, and just seems to sort of, it creep into everything, including professional life and workplace, as I mentioned earlier. But I think the other thing for me is that certainly how I felt, and a lot of people who I work with, the thing that really they struggle with is that they've had this idea that they understand what the formula is for success in life. And generally, if they've wanted something before, they've been able to get there through that hard work, grit, determination, try harder, do more. And that's kind of been their recipe for success before. And that does not work with fertility. Mm-hmm. And when you get into that place, it's such a feeling of hopelessness, helplessness. It's a terrifying place to be in, and you kind of lose your sense of self. And in some of the conversations we've had already, like this lack of control and this lack of certainty becomes a really difficult thing to live with. This lack of control, this lack of ability to be able to do anything, whether it's to be able to get the support that you need, Liz, like you were saying about talking to the GP, sometimes just getting access to what you need to be able to move forwards. There's just a feeling of you just can't quite get there. You just can't get to the person who you need to speak to. Or in the workplace, it can be, ultimately this comes down to what's happening in your body. And like Joanna was saying, you don't get to decide when your appointments are, you get told, but you get told based on what's happening in your body, and you don't really have control over what's happening in your body. So it's all, you can't just set a nice little plan of action and a little timetable, and you can't go to your employer and say, I'm going to be off these dates. And it's just not quite like that. And that makes it difficult on the other side of the fence as well for employers to manage, because there does need to be that flexibility, and generally we're wired to want things to be certain all of the time. And I think for me that's a real standout thing, that knowing that, having to let go of the fact that you can't control it all.
Yeah, takes it to a whole new realm, doesn't it, when you think about all the elements that are just beyond your control in that time. So and Afam, I'm particularly pleased to have you here today, because I think when we're talking about fertility, so often the focus is on women because it's happening within women's bodies, but it's 1 in 7 couples. So actually, that there are an awful lot of men impacted by this journey. It's not a female problem, it's a couple problem. And so again, really, really interested to hear your perspective and take on things.
Sure. I think for us going through the journey, I think we had no idea what type of marathon that it would become. In our mind, we loosely thought we knew what the journey would be like, but until you actually embark on it, you don't really. It's almost. I have the picture of. It's almost as if you're stepping on a pathway, and then all of a sudden, someone puts a blindfold around you, and you're asked to go onto this journey without a guide, in many respects. So for us, it was in many cases underestimating the mounting financial costs, because we went through 5 cycles before we had success. The psychological challenge, it also as well, I think you feel like you're living 2 lives, as it were. So on one hand, you're living your day-to-day lives, but you also have this separate journey of infertility that, number one, who do we know who's been through the journey that we can talk to? That wasn't there. Then also as well, within the medical community, we would find sometimes a degree of ignorance towards people journeying the infertility, going on the infertility journey. And one of the things that I found from a male perspective, which was quite interesting to observe, was how the medical community and sometimes maternity services would view the male in the relationship. So often we understand that on the journey, most of the attention will be on the female partner because she's carrying the baby, medication and the like. But I found that when we would go into meetings, very few consultants would address me in the same fashion they would do with my wife. I was very rarely ever asked the question, first of all, what type of husband are you? How do you view your wife? Are you supportive of her? There was never any of that. And I think for me, I found that quite interesting to observe. And I think one of the challenges this will have on men in particular is that if they're not mentally prepared for that journey, it's challenging enough knowing that you're there to support your wife. But I think the services sometimes don't also acknowledge that if you don't address the man as well correctly, you may not discover what type of mental health challenges he may be facing at the time, psychological challenges, all these other additional challenges that you need to know when you're dealing with a couple going through the journey. I think for us, what was different is that we come from a Christian faith community, and within church networks, generally, this is not even a subject that's talked about very often, let alone in the workplace, in other areas. So for us, we relied very heavily on our spiritual compass to get us through stage by stage, especially during the difficulties and the setbacks. But from a relational standpoint, one of the things that we discovered having come through the journey and come through the other side is that you're dealing with the three different things you're dealing with. You're dealing with your relationship as a unit, then also the female partner is dealing with the journey herself, how this is impacting herself mentally, physiological, and also the male partner is doing that as well. So whenever we would have disappointments or failed cycles, I would always do my best to encourage my wife, support her, and comfort her during that challenge. But that would not negate from the private pain she was also going through at the time as well. So you find that, well, we found that as a couple, we had to very quickly get to a place whereby we look at it like, how can we support each other during this journey? She may need space, she may need she may need comfort, but you can't be there to support your partner 24 hours, 7 days a week. So we realize that there's not an awful lot of preparation for the mental marathon that you have to go through. And if it's not managed correctly, it's very easy to see how couples can break up during this journey, because one partner may be not totally understanding what the other partner is going through, and each partner handles pressure differently. And so these are a number of things we've had to navigate and go through. And having come through the other side, we really determined that we wanted to set up a company to support couples on this journey, because it's a very exclusive club. Once you're in you genuinely you're a different person coming out of the end of it than from when you began, because there's so many variables to consider. Yeah, that's one of the things that.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, and I think describing it as a marathon really kind of resonates, because it's not a quick process in any of this journey. I think, and whether you are fortunate and the issues get resolved, let's say quickly, but it's not quick. That's still often years of real time, and the impact for a couple, as you say, emotionally, physically, the mental health challenges, and then you've got to go into work and perform like nothing's wrong, nothing's up. You're still focused, you're still committed to the day job, can be really, really challenging, I think. And there's also then the intersectional piece. I think within a lot of cultures and communities, there is stigma around fertility. I was talking about this session before it happened a couple of days ago with a gentleman of Indian heritage. And he was saying, within his religion, there was a woman who was divorced because she was unable to bear children and give the family the heir and everything else. And actually, this process repeated itself 2 or 3 times with the same groom, husband. And actually, it was really clear that the issue may not have been with the women, well, it wasn't with the women, but the stigma and the shame that was brought on them. They were actually divorced and sort of outcast within that community as being broken, being, having failed in their duties. And actually, it was completely inaccurate. So I think there's also that sometimes stigma that prevents people having these conversations. So how do you get the support?
It's interesting you say that, Liz, because that's one of the things that we've put into the vision of what we do at Adobe Fertility. Because there is a lot of stigma, sometimes ignorance, sometimes miscommunication, and the fact that it's becoming a lot more a topic of conversation now, but there's still such a long way to go. And we identified that there's a lot of targeted support needed for people from ethnic minority backgrounds and faith communities, because of a lot of the stigma. Sometimes certain religious stigma, for example, can be that, if a woman is not having a child, is God not looking upon her favorably? And we know that that's not the case. There's a lot of medical, there are a lot of medical issues that could be the case. There could be things like in our case, with my wife, we ultimately we discovered that one of the issues that was the factor was that she had fibroids, which are non-cancerous growths that affect women, but in particular within the African Caribbean community, it can at times be much more prevalent. But we encountered within the medical community that we dealt with a certain degree of ignorance. At one stage, we suggested, do you think we should get them taken out? And we were told by one particular clinic, no, we don't think it will actually impact the pregnancy, which ended up not being true. So
huge. That, you know, that's not an insignificant, oh yeah, no, I got that wrong. That's massive.
Yeah. But it's one of the things that we are looking forward to doing more of, going into faith communities and communities of ethnic minority backgrounds to actually describe and explain how it really is, to get rid of some of the, for want of a word, folk tales, because it will impact the journey. Because, for example, if you've got a man who just is adamant that the issue has to be the female partners, it makes the journey more difficult than it needs to be. So I'm actually appreciative of the fact that just from a male perspective, I can get up and speak and just say, actually, it's not always the case. Actually, yes, going on the journey, there will be challenges and the like, but you know, these are issues we need to talk more about. And look, we're an example of that. And I think just everyone on this panel, credit to you all as well, because just from your own journeys, your story, just that sometimes is enough to give someone the courage to actually go embark on the journey of fertility treatment if required.
Yeah, most definitely.
I was just going to mention as well, because we've been talking so far about this being a heterosexual couple issue, and yes, there's lots of we need to think about the impact of cultures as well. But I also think we need to remember that it's not just heterosexual couples who face fertility issues. There are people who are going solo to try and become parents, and there's also the LGBTQ plus community who will need support to become the parents that they long to be as well. And I think that there are additional challenges that and stigmas and issues that you can face in those communities as well, and more difficult challenges to access the support that you need. And I think sometimes I find in those communities there's a lot of education required of the managers and the HR teams in the workplace to understand the processes that they're going through as well, to be able to get the support that they need. And again, it comes back to the fact that it just hasn't been talked about, and there hasn't been that education there for people to be able to be a source of support, both in professional context and personal context.
Yeah, I think it's if as an individual you're going through this and you're not actually very supported personally, and so you are relying on good old Google for, you know, information and support, or, you know, perhaps some of these networks that are essentially connecting you to strangers that you have shared common ground in this instance. But as we say, then community, faith, and all these other elements play a part. So actually, how do people access support for them that's going to be relevant, I suppose, to their set of circumstances and their be that faith or anything else? Do you think there's enough out there for people to get that personal support?
I mean, just listening to you all speaking just then has just, me personally, just made me think, oh my goodness, that it's so much bigger. You know, Afam, what you just shared then, what you just explained, even I hadn't necessarily thought from that perspective. So there's so much more education needed, and that's from somebody that's been through the journey. And, you know, even I haven't necessarily thought that in that way. So yeah, there's definitely greater awareness, understanding, support needed, right?
And that's when I think when it comes to supporting people, then that's the challenge with this, that once you've supported someone through it, you don't have it nailed the next time, because every journey is different.
Yeah.
Every person is different. The way they experience their journey is different, and the way they experience that journey is different, and it changes. And for them, my journey was 11 years, and how I was with it changed as I evolved and I grew and I changed with it. And one IVF wasn't the same as the next IVF, one miscarriage wasn't the same as the next. So that's why when it comes to support, and again, we have to lose the idea that there's a formula for anything. It is a case of seeking to understand. It's generally about listening and being curious and learning, and then having an attitude of compassion and possibility and flexibility, and to be able to support, essentially. There's not like a lot of boxes you tick to say, and that's how you do supporting fertility in the workplace. So.
Yeah, it's not a one size fits all, is it? Because even in one workplace, you might have, I was really lucky when I went through my journey, because I had two very supportive, I had a direct line manager who was very supportive, and then I had a dotted line into a managing director who had gone through IVF herself. And so I was very, very lucky. But in that organisation, there might have been other people in other teams with different managers who might not have had that same support. Yeah. So it's really interesting. Like you say, even in an organisation, there might be different support being provided at different times, dependent on the manager, depending on so many different factors. So you're absolutely right. It's so complex, isn't it?
And you don't want your support to come down to whether you win the line manager lottery. There needs to be a culture within an organisation and an ethos that is open and inclusive about these, and well informed about these things, so that you can create an environment in which people can talk about it if they want to. And I think we need to be clear about that. This isn't forcing everybody to now come clean about what's something that's deeply personal and challenging, and respecting the fact that, again, in different cultures, people might be more amenable to talking about it than in others, and for a variety of reasons people might be that. This is about giving people a safe space to talk and seek support and feel that they can be supported back if that's right for them.
Yeah, I think that's where I was heading to when I asked the question about the personal support, because if you are navigating this journey for the first time, and you're struggling as an individual and as a couple to know what support there is, and what you're going to need, and how the journey might look, and what you might have ahead of you, how do you even have that conversation in the workplace about, right, I'm going to foresee that this is going to be however long, that I'm going to have these appointments, I'm going to need medication refrigerated, or I'm going to need all these, might seem like quite insignificant details at the time, but you don't know what's ahead, do you? So it's quite difficult for it to be employee-led when they don't know what's ahead of them. So for the three of you, what things, Jo, you've just mentioned, obviously you had the line manager and the director that could empathise and were really supportive. But what other experiences have you had about the support on your journey? Are there specific examples of what went well or what didn't go well that would have been very easy to do?
So when I think back, so I truly believe I was really, really lucky to have such support in the workplace. Interestingly, and this might just be an internal feeling, had I had a male manager at that point, I don't know if I would have been so forthcoming in saying, hey, this is the situation. So I think the fact that my direct manager was female, and she was just a fantastic manager. She was an example of brilliant management and leadership. Everything that you mentioned, Emma, listened, curious, no judgment. She didn't have children of her own, didn't want children, but still, she could have been the complete opposite. Like, I don't want children, so what are you complaining about? But she was the complete opposite. And then the director that I had a dotted line into at the time, having gone through it herself, when I came back from those appointments every other day and they're saying, right, well, your follicles haven't grown or they're not where they need to be. And I would go into her room as a safe space and cry. And she would say, Jo, you don't need a whole football team. You just need a star player. That's all you need. You don't need a football team, just that star player. And that little pep talk, but having that room to go in, have a cry, and then get myself together and go back out was helpful. But at the same time, when I think about it, did I need, I had to go and put my game face on afterwards. And actually what I could have done with was probably just going to a coffee shop and sitting down and have a cup of tea and, just having a minute to myself, but there just wasn't that opportunity. When we tried a second time with an embryo that we were lucky enough to have frozen, it didn't work out that second time. So it was a completely different experience. And I had a male manager at that time, and I didn't tell them about that journey. I kept it all to myself. Now, they probably would have been cool and would have been understanding, but I don't know. It might just be a me thing. I just didn't feel comfortable sharing that sort of vulnerability, and I don't know. I just didn't feel comfortable at that point. Yeah.
And like you say, that game face, having to keep that on.
Yeah.
So damaging for
it's exhausting.
And I think psychological safety in the workplace is so important, but that's a whole topic in itself.
One thing that you mentioned, Liz, sorry, you mentioned about medication. So this one time I did have some medication that needed to be refrigerated, and I had to get back to work. And so my dad, bless him, travelled all the way into London, came to an appointment with me, and he took, because my husband couldn't come to this particular appointment, unfortunately, and my dad, bless him, took the medication home, put it in the fridge for me, because I didn't feel comfortable having medication in a fridge, in a kitchen that everybody can access, like all around the lunches and whatnot. So even like a medical fridge in an organisation would be useful, like a discreet fridge would be useful.
It's quite a insignificant thing, isn't it? But actually it's really significant if you haven't shared widely that you're on this journey, and people are suddenly going, oh, what's that? Why have you got this for? And questions that you're not necessarily wanting to have to answer or need to answer. So what about you, two? Were there things that you felt were particularly good in your experience with your employers? Or
I was just going to say, before I answer that question, I was going to say something that Emma touched on earlier, which I think is very key: culture in a workplace, because every workplace will be very different. So I think there's no one size fits all here. It's very bespoke. If you're a train driver, it's very difficult to be able to get the time off to do something, as opposed to if you, say, work in a cafe. So I think that is the challenge. What is the culture and the setup of the organization that you're in when you're about to embark on this journey? And then I think on top of that, it's like the journey of the fertility journey is such a personal journey that naturally you would share with very, very close friends or family at the right time, but you're being asked to take something that's of confidant level into a workplace where the people you encounter with may be either acquaintances, and then possibly the next level up, some of them will be friends. So how are you expected to take information of a confidant level into a space that may not respect it from a confidential perspective? So I think that is one of the challenges that any individual or couple begins to face when they go into a workplace when they're on that journey. In our case, it was a bit different because I was working for myself, so I could choose the times that I could go out. So fortunately for me, I was able to attend every appointment that my wife had, every meeting that we needed to be at. I was in a position where it was fortunate for me to do that. With the nature of my wife's work, she was able to schedule time off when she needed, but due to the nature of her work, she didn't feel comfortable enough sharing that journey with key personnel there. So what we found, the challenges tended to come whenever we had a failed cycle, because it's dealing with the disappointment of that. And then she's having to go back to work and put her game face on. So for us, the key area of support was the support that we had for each other. That was very important to navigating each stage. But we recognize that not everybody has that. You know, if you're doing this as a single individual, the challenge is 10 times more difficult. So I don't. It's a challenge. It's different. I think it is. The big thing is understanding the culture of the workplace you're in, and if you're fortunate to have line managers or personnel that are sympathetic to the journey or understand the journey or are willing to understand the journey, that deals with so much there and then. So it really is about the culture and the character of the people in the organization there. If the character is right, I think it makes the journey so much easier for employees there. But even if you have an organizational structure that's excellent, if the character of the people, the leadership, the management there is not credible, not sympathetic, not authentic, not supportive, it's very hard to move forward. People are less likely going to volunteer that personal information in that space if they don't feel that information is going to be respected, trusted, and honored.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Emma, you've obviously done quite a lot of work in the space in educating and supporting organisations that want to do more for their people. Are there some elements there that you kind of think are essentials and minimum standards? How do you help somebody put this in place for their employees?
I think actually I've got a blog on my website, which if people want to have a look at, it's at readysteadycoach.com. That's about how you go about some 5 key steps you can take to support employees. And I think the first thing is acknowledging and accepting that, yep, it's an issue in your workplace as well, because it's a lot of people will take the view that's not an issue here. We're not big enough. We're more too male. We're too whatever. But if you think about some of the stats we've been talking about, 1 in 7 heterosexual couples, as well as same-sex couples, as well as people who are going solo, as well as the people who are 1 in 4 are having miscarriages, and you apply those stats to your organisation, then this is an issue for you too. So the one, it's getting over that thing of that hump of saying, yeah, this matters where I am. And just because you haven't been hearing about it doesn't mean it hasn't been happening, and there aren't people under your nose who are struggling. They're just doing it in silence. And then I think the second thing is then that education piece is really sort of getting an understanding of who's affected by these issues, how are they affected, is a little bit about what we're talking about today, and how does that reflect in the professional context, how does that come out in work environments, and what exactly is it going through, and what are good practice ways of supporting them, what would they benefit from. Obviously, as we said earlier, it's individual, but there's some common themes that you can get an understanding of. And then when you're armed with that information, that's when you can look at, well, what are the benefits that we are going to provide? And, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have big budgets. It doesn't have to be funding fertility treatment and giving heaps of paid time off for these things. If you can do those things, great, they'd be appreciated. But it's the little things that matter, just like we've talked about before. Can you put a fridge there so that people can put their drugs in? Can you have a quiet place for conversations with embryologists? Can you be a little bit more compassionate around things like people bringing their babies in, and pregnancy celebrations, announcements, in terms of how you let your workforce know that these things are going to happen and make it optional for people to attend? How can you be a little more thoughtful to those things? How can you spark conversations? It could be all of these things that on a day-to-day can make big differences, to make people feel acknowledged, to make people feel heard, to make people feel that if they want to, they can talk, they can share. And wrapping that up into a policy that, you know, people can go to feel that actually this is an organisation that does accept me and having these issues and is here to support me. And then it's back to that culture, because, you know, we've been talking about our experiences, and I was in an organisation that was very progressive on these things. It had fertility policy way back. So we're talking, you know, quite a number of years ago now in my case, and a lot of organisations still don't have that now. Had a good line manager, all of the rest of it. But it's about not just having these things, but having an environment in which people feel that they can use these things. There's no point having a policy if people are too scared to use it. And I think we need to talk a little bit about why people might be scared to use it, which we've kind of touched on, and Afam was talking about that as well. And I think that creeps into the issue about, are people still afraid, not just to talk about something that's deeply personal and like has some stigma, has some shame potentially attached to it, but it's about wanting to have kids. And actually the fear of you're going to think I'm not interested in my career if you know that I want to have a family, and you're going to think, oh, she's just going to get pregnant, and it links to the whole fact that there's still a bit of an issue about how you might be perceived if you then become parents. And you know, not only do you want to be a parent, but you're going to be difficult becoming a parent. It's that kind of like, oh, now I'm like a treble threat, you know, like a big burden. And not only do I want to be a parent, or I want to have them help becoming a parent, you know, it's that kind of thing. We need to feel that there's the support there, that you know, as an organisation, you do support people to be parents and to become parents whenever it's right for them, on whatever path might be necessary and right for them as well. So, and a lot of that, I think, comes down to, as I said, the day-to-day. It's, have you got networks for this? Have you got peer groups? Are you using your people? I think, Joanna, you might have said at the beginning, your people are your best asset, and oh, it's you, Liz, but someone said that in the right, and your people are your best asset to deal with this, because if you can get some advocates in your organisation, they can do a wealth of stuff for you to get this moving, to open up those conversations, and to start providing and growing a culture where this stuff, the support is in-house. It's potentially already there. It's just about linking it up and bringing it out into the open.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm always a little bit mindful when we have conversations about policies and whatever that policy is, because I'm like, great, put a policy in place, make sure it's a really good one, but actually that's not gonna solve whatever issue it might be, and whether that's, you know, a trans and non-binary policy, whether it's a menopause policy, whether anything else. It's not going to actually create a supportive and helpful environment on its own. You need to do the work around and outside that, as you've all said, to actually provide that psychological safety, that people are able to know that that support is there for them, and that they can have those conversations without fear, and without it impacting their career ambitions, aspirations, and everything else, regardless of their gender and regardless of their situation, as you know, you've all said today. So that's amazing. Thank you. I think it's been a really fascinating conversation and important conversation. just to finish off, if there's one piece of advice that you could give an organisation to do better, something really simple, what would your one takeaway be?
So just as we've been speaking this morning, and Emma, you just touched on it, networks. If there's in my previous organisation that I worked in, we had a lot of networks, fantastic networks, a lot of allies, brilliant. But actually, when I think back to my journey, if there had have been people in the wider business, I know I had the MD that had been through the journey, so I was quite lucky in that respect. But if I had known other people in the business going through that journey, it makes it like you're not broken, it takes away that shame. I think you mentioned, Emma, that you potentially feel like I'm a failure. So a network of people could, it could be confidential. They don't have to say, don't have to have their names all over the internet going, yeah, I'm sure there'll be a way of creating a network of allies that might have be experiencing it, have gone through it, somebody that you could talk to confidentially. I think that would be something that is low cost, no cost. It doesn't, you're not having to go externally and pay for anything. It's something that can be created internally. And I think that would have been massive for me back then, knowing that other people in the business were going through the same journey or similar, going through the same challenges and whatnot, and having somebody to speak to would have been amazing.
Yeah, I can see that. And even with a really small company that say, we couldn't have a network ourselves because we've only got 10 people or something, actually knowing other local support networks that are there and being able to connect and give your people time to engage with them is, again, perhaps helpful in terms of having that support around you and reducing that stigma, taking away and saying, yeah, we understand these conversations are valuable and you need to have them. Emma, Afam, anything to add that you would?
I would say have something connected with HR or the HR policy. I think, as Jo said earlier, if an organization considers the people as their greatest asset, when it comes to recruitment, when it comes to, say, you bring somebody new into the business and you say, right, this is what our company is about, this is our culture, this is what we do. People are always interested in what are the benefits? If I join this company, what are the benefits? It might be, I get free health insurance, I get this. But if there's something that also says that we take the view of people starting a family very seriously, in whatever shape that may take. If a person can see that early on, that will change their perspective. Right? Okay, if I do decide to start a family down the line, at least I know in this organization this won't be considered an alien thing, or I won't feel like I'm going to lose my job or what have you. There may not be a network there already, but if the communication is there that states that as an organization, these are the things that we consider to also be important, I think that's a good step that an organization can take.
Yeah, no, that's lovely.
I agree with what Afam's just said, and I also think that if you've an organisation with these policies, it's a good idea as part of your recruitment to be dishing them out as a matter of course up front. This is what our approach is to maternity, to paternity, to fertility, to baby loss, to all of these things. Then it's kind of like, look, it's out there, and you don't have to come and ask us either, because you don't want to be the person to just be open. This is it. This is what we've got, and then people can gauge what's, without having to stick their head up and say, well, I'm thinking I might be going to be doing IVF. So have you got, the information's there. I think the key is to do something. Definitely is to do something, and it doesn't have to be huge steps. It can be little steps. And I think as was the starting point, if you're new to this, just go back and start a conversation in one shape or form. Start a conversation in your organisation about it to get that going. That could be by, if you have an experience and you feel you can, speaking up about it yourself, about sharing what you've heard on this webinar. It could be inviting in a speaker to talk about it, but in some way, shape or form, just get a conversation started, and that will snowball typically that opens things up, and the conversations go from there, and then you can take it one step at a time.
Amazing. That's perfect. Well, I think this is something that we could talk about for days, and I would learn every minute of it. So thank you so much for being here and participating in this really important conversation. I hope anyone watching will take this back into their organisation and start creating these conversations and thinking about how they support their people, what is in place, and perhaps doing things differently moving forward. That's the whole point of Infertility Awareness Week, is that we do start these conversations. So thank you to my amazing panel. And I really appreciate you sharing your experiences and expertise with us.